So, we are going to go over fossil fuel power plants and climate change as a wicked problem. When we are looking at the fossil fuel power plants, we're going to typically be looking at three different types of power plants. We're going to be looking at coal-fired power plants, gas-fueled power plants, and diesel-ran power plants. Your coal and gas are going to be your main two fossil fuel plants you see. And if you look into the picture on the right of the screen, you can see where a lot of the main power plants are located, especially the coal and the black, gas and the orange. Nuclear is actually a really big power plant that we have around on the eastern coast. But when we're looking at fossil fuel power plants, it's important to kind of realize how much emissions they're like producing and putting off. And so to get a general idea, when you're looking at a typical interglacial period, you're going to look at levels that are about 300 parts per million carbon dioxide. And we find that around the Industrial Revolution, like right before it, we're sitting at around 280 parts per million of CO2. And after the industrial period, especially when the fossil fuels started taking over and coal was being burned a lot more, oil, gas was not quite yet there. But when these main fossil fuels took over, our CO2 levels rose to 400 parts per million and they continue to rise every single year. Additionally, although power plants and their emissions have caused numerous issues, climate change being one of the biggest ones that we have, especially in terms of fossil fuel power plants being a wicked problem, we also need to realize that these fossil fuel power plants have led society to where we are today. And they have propelled technology, our economies, and civilization as a whole by allowing us to dedicate more time to other things while these power plants have taken over a lot of the manual labor in terms of power production. So, how are these fossil fuel power plants affecting us? Well, in terms of climate, a quarter of the emissions worldwide, especially in the US, are from fossil fuel power plants alone. And these, as we all know, exacerbate climate change. And climate change causes extreme weather events, the retreat of the glaciers and permafrost, desertification, and mass species extinction. Meanwhile, socially, we're kind of looking at policy, which is largely affected by which government sources are available to you. Especially while I was researching this, you find that there is not a lot of information out there in terms of specifics. And a lot of that is because these power plants are government owned and they aren't going to release that information. And again, socially, the climate change has the extreme weather events and it affects food security and soil salinization. And this affects everyone around our globe. These extreme weather events affect people who live on our coastal regions. The food security is affected by soil salinization so that it can't grow plants as well, which leads to food availability also reducing. Economically, our power sector's economics are highly reliant on fossil fuels, which kind of incentivizes people to just find ways to keep using fossil fuels, even if it's used more efficiently, which is good, but sometimes they just want to keep using fossil fuels, not to look out for new technologies, which is going to be more expensive. And then climate change also strongly affects our economy. Thinking back to those extreme weather events, especially, is going to ruin the economies in the areas that experience these events where they have to rebuild, repopulate, and kind of rebuild that economy from the bottom up, especially in developing areas. And when we're looking at the future of fossil fuel power plants and fossil fuels as a whole, in terms of fossil fuel power plants, we're looking at the carbon capture and storage, which is when you are taking additional water to help cool and reduce the amount of carbon that is released in emissions. While this is really, really promising technology, it does increase water intake to an unfeasible amount. So if this were to become a feasible technology, we need to reduce the amount of water it is consuming. Additionally, we can use cleaner burning fossil fuels such as gas instead of coal, especially like lower qualities of coal. And then we also can lean to renewable and clean sources, such as wind turbines, which are fairly feasible within our lifetimes, but the recyclability of them is a major point because a lot of the materials that go into them are not recyclable. And also kind of more studying the wind patterns of our earth and how wind turbines affect that will also help that become a more reliable source of energy. Additionally, hydropower, although it does have its setbacks, especially when it comes to climate change affecting water and the different river currents that are going through our entire globe, especially here in the US. And solar power is super dependable on the region. So it doesn't make it a great source to kind of replace our energy sector. It is good locally, especially in areas that are high exposure to sun. And here are the works cited. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.